Okay, we are right at 10 o'clock. I just wanted to welcome everybody today for the exciting topic that we have for y'all. We will be discussing historic preservation and environmental considerations and debris operations today. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers today so they can introduce themselves and we can get started. John, it's all yours. Oh, let me stop scaring my screen. There you go.
No problem. Thank you once again, Amanda, and our friends at H-GAC for putting on today's presentation. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you in this virtual environment on this important topic. I do appreciate the folks who have put some information in the chat box regarding the organization that they're with and that their title. So that certainly helps us from just an overall big picture and being able to additionally tailor this presentation to the needs of our audience. For those on the phone, I want to introduce myself. My name is John Burry. I'm Director of Post-Disaster Programs with Tetra Tech. I live in the Houston area, have all my life, and have been in the private sector supporting state and local governments, as well as other non-governmental entities, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. I think I have been a part of over 60 different presidentially declared disasters, serving and supporting debris missions, FEMA public assistance programs, hazard mitigation, long-term recovery, and other housing and infrastructure type of programs. This is today's topic. Before we get into that, today's topic is something that's near and dear to my heart because I know how important it is when it comes to the planning process. And with that, I want to ask Brian Rutherford, my esteemed colleague for more than a dozen years, to introduce himself, another native Houstonian as well, and someone who lives in Galveston County. Brian? Brian, you're on mute there.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Yes, as John said, I am a native Houstonian, now living in League City in Galveston County. I've been with Tetra Tech for just over 15 years now. Been doing some sort of debris operations in there, either the response side and also doing a lot of the planning. So I've written or been involved in the development or update of over 50 plans in Texas and California, Florida, different parts of the country. So I've kind of seen, what goes well in the planning process. And so very happy to share what I've learned through all those different plans and responses with you today.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Russo, Nick, another gentleman I've known for, I think, close to 15 years as well. Nick?
Nick Russo with Tetra Tech, serve as Director of Post-Disaster Environmental Services within our Disaster Recovery Business Unit here. Also native Houstonian, lived here all my life. This is a great topic. I kind of live in the environmental world. Also have experience managing debris removal operations at the local government level, and happy to really talk about the intersection of where environmental compliance and debris management really come into play. So look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you all. Before we go ahead and get started and throw the PowerPoint up, Amanda, is there any other housekeeping items that we need to go over before we get into the content?
I am so sorry. If you're in a room and there are more than one person with you on the webinar, if you could do us a favor and please just type the name of everybody who's with you in the chat so that we get an accurate representation of our attendance today. And then other than that, if you have a question, we are using the Q&A feature today. So you can type your question right there into that Q&A. If your question goes into the chat, we will be monitoring it and we will try to make sure that we answer that. But keeping it in the Q&A helps us keep things a little more organized. And then other than that, please make sure that if you're in the webinar today and you're not presenting, that you are on mute. So that way we are not interrupting our speakers. And other than that, that is all I have for housekeeping. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And as our team and Nick pulls up the PowerPoint, I wanted to just start off with some introductory and opening remarks. First of all, again, quick housekeeping here. Number one is this webinar is scheduled for 2 hours, and we're planning and we've prepared content for that entire duration. We will not be taking any breaks. Obviously, this is being recorded, so grab your bottle of water, make sure you have your coffee, and let's go ahead and dive into this. The purpose of today's presentation is really to provide you with the practical knowledge and information for you to be able to start planning for debris generating events, as well as be able to be in that response function. What's neat about today is that you're going to hear from 3 individuals who have, again, a great deal of experience in working with a lot of local governments. I see a lot of folks from the Council of Governments in different parts of Texas, which I think is so neat here, because you're going to get that perspective from Brian Rutherford, who's been there and supported planning efforts and debris management plans for, again, local governments across the US, and have been with small ones, large ones, very complex, everybody from Los Angeles County, all the way down to some small local governments in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I think that perspective brings again a neat way to inform and digest this information. And then of course Nick Russo, who has spent his career in the public sector, as well as now with the private sector, and has been on both sides of the table here in your shoes, or in the planning process, as well as the recovery and debris manager. And so, and of course myself, I'm going to hopefully give you some war stories, meaning those stories that provide a little bit of the color commentary and provide a little bit of color to how all this information and how everything fits together. So when it comes to environmental and historical preservation, it's one of those areas that often gets overlooked when it comes to debris management. But I will tell you that this topic, as well as I'd say probably procurement, are the 2 long poles in the tent, meaning that those are the ones that can really stifle or impact your ability to execute on the operation side. We certainly want to all be able to get out there, get the debris, keep moving things forward. However, if you're not doing it in a way that considers and complies with environmental and historical preservations, that could certainly be troublesome. And what I mean there is everything from a historic doing debris removal operations in a historic cemetery, or executing a private property debris removal program where you're actually going on to people, to individuals in need, disaster survivors, and alleviating their debris issue on their property. Doing a wildfire type of incident. I mean, we certainly are feeling it this summer. It reminds me of 2011, quite frankly, when we had the terrible Bastrop wildfire, as well as many other wildfires across the state. Or you could be a coastal community. I saw a representative from the Coastal Bend Council of Government down in the Corpus area, and this environmental and historical preservation may have an intersection with endangered species. Section 7, consultations. You may have a nesting season, whether it's a sea turtle, whether it's a migratory bird, something like that, that may impact your debris removal. So today's presentation is to really provide information that is designed for you at the operational level, and making sure that we don't ignore things and that we acknowledge and understand and really consider how the environmental piece fits into all of the debris. One thing I'll tell you in preparing for this presentation, I've had the privilege of working with H-GAC for many, many years. And I went back to some of our older webinars, and one that I got a chuckle out of, quite frankly, was one from 2010. It was done during the March timeframe in 2010, and it was on a very similar topic. It was looking at special considerations for debris removal operation, and we did an interactive piece called H-GAC's Road to the Final Four. Again, it was a March Madness theme, and we divided the audience. This is was in person at 3555 Timmons there, and we broke out the groups into little subgroups, and then we looked at which is the most important consideration when it comes to, is it it was the regulatory division, was it the environmental division, who was coming out of the historical division, kind of like the north, south, east, and west of the final four. And what ended up winning was the environmental. And by winning, I mean, what's the most important consideration when you're looking at debris operations? And that stands true today. Well, it doesn't matter really where you are, urban, suburban, rural, coastal or inland, up in the panhandle of Texas, in the plains in Wichita Falls. It really does, it is one of those cross-cutting elements. And that's why we have, again, a great presentation here prepared. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Russo to go ahead and get the ball rolling. Nick, thanks so much for pulling up the presentation, and I'll turn it over to you.
All righty. So what we're really talking about today is considering environmental and historical preservation and debris operations. And this is really important because as some of you may know, and some of you who have not experienced a real life disaster in your community, managing debris during these situations is incredibly challenging. There's always something different that occurs, some unique issue in every disaster that I've run across. Also we always have to kind of maintain the thought process that we definitely are not trying to create any damages to the environment. What we want to do as managers and practitioners is to remove debris from the environment, right, as quickly and efficiently as possible to improve the impact to the community. But we also just have to make sure that we're following the right rules and the right laws and any permits that need to be obtained. So that's really the bulk of our conversation here today. And so to do that, we really have to, consider advanced thought, planning, and coordination amongst various stakeholders and various levels of government, including the private sector and county managers who have experience in waste management, right? And Brian, you can maybe provide some of that planning thought here in terms of assisting communities with their disaster debris management plans and really considering those types of things.
Yeah, so whenever we look at doing a plan, developing a plan, or even updating a plan, always try to pull together all the different departments and stakeholders and even the contractors that might have a role in the event that the plan has to be activated. You certainly want everyone to have a good idea of what their roles and responsibilities are before the incident occurs. So when it does happen, it can be a quick boots on the ground, and people will know what they're supposed to do, know what the resources are available. That's the other thing is in the plan, making sure that not only those roles and responsibilities are spelled out, but also those resources are also spelled out. So working with the landfills and recycling centers, get an idea of where some of this stuff can go. So, but yeah, having everyone at the table, even your garbage pickup, whoever you use for that, making sure they understand their role. Because I remember after Harvey, remember seeing some information going back and forth where there was some misunderstanding between the garbage collection company and the debris contractor, where the garbage collection company thought they would be handling more of that load. And so anyways, just make sure everyone's on the same page if you ever do have to activate the plan by having all those people at the table when you're actually doing the planning process.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So moving on to the next slide. The intersection of debris operations and environmental and historical considerations really kind of depends on how the operation, how your debris, what the impact to the community is, and how you're beginning to remove debris from impacted areas. And of course, the larger or the magnitude of that event in terms of debris generation from the disaster is really important, because we can, we've seen some smaller type storm events, maybe, small tropical storms, small flooding events, and then all the way up to, major hurricane impacts and incredibly large flooding events, which have occurred in our H-GAC region quite frequently over the last few years. And so as those, as the complexity of needing, disaster debris management sites, which we'll frequently use the word DMS site in this presentation, or disposal sites that we need to take, different types of debris to, the environmental historical considerations really come into play. I'd also mention that depending on damages to your municipal maintained infrastructure, whether that's roads, bridges, detention basins, channels or drainage facilities, all the way up to your buildings, the laws that come into play also apply to basically the repair and potentially the rebuilding of those structures. And so that's something that we always have to keep in mind with the agencies, especially at the federal level, who are going to come into play in reviewing these projects. So the types of issues that we are describing are, endangered species. John kind of mentioned, we see a lot of that in terms of wildfire activity. I know out in the Bastrop region many years ago, the Houston toad was an endangered species that needed certain protection there in terms of removing debris and doing a lot of the recovery activities. Historical sites, whether those are previous archaeological sites or historical buildings. Historical trees. So some communities around us have very prominent trees that are, some of which are designated as historical in nature. May need some special coordination with the local agencies there to handle maybe cutting of those trees or cutting of hazardous limbs. Cemeteries, another big one, right? So that's pretty sensitive in nature, having people who are buried on that site. Some of those may be historical as well, and so just making sure we coordinate with the right entities and exercise the right standard of care when working those environments. Waterway debris as well. So one of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation is issues and regulations that involve waterways, wetlands, floodways, and that sort of thing. So we need to make sure that debris removal activities are following the right guidance. And of course, buildings are buildings that have collapsed, and you also can get into historical issues with those, as well as asbestos, which may be prevalent in the building environment. So moving on, the agenda of today is really to talk about the role of those various regulatory agencies, a little bit on the National Environmental Policy Act, which we'll refer to as NEPA, environmental justice, disposal options for disaster debris, protection of wetlands. We'll talk about some outdoor burning, disposal of animals, household hazardous waste or HHW type material, and historical considerations. So part one is the role of those regulatory agencies in debris operations. Let's talk about Texas regulatory agencies first. So the agencies that we're going to deal with, just real quickly to run through those, are going to be Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. They're going to be involved in where our disaster debris is going, what the regulations for solid waste are, debris management site permitting. Texas Department of State Health Services, which you'll see is going to involve some of the asbestos regulations. Texas Historical Commission, or THC, on our historical and archaeological sites reviews. Texas Department of Transportation, right, who's out there maintaining our roads and bridges at the state level. And we may need to coordinate with them on right-of-way activities and issues to their infrastructure. Texas Animal Health Commission on animals. Dead animals can be a disaster debris stream, right? We've seen that in several events. Texas General Land Office, who's maintains state-owned right-of-way or state-owned submerged lands, and also gets involved in waterway debris removal. So Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, again, provides approvals for DMS sites, can issue emergency permits for debris incineration or burning, provides an advice and assistance for debris disposal, and assists local jurisdiction on the potential environmental impacts of debris removal and disposal operations. Moving on, it's really important to understand what the guidance is from TCEQ. And I'll mention, their regional offices. So in this area, we deal with the Houston regional office. The staff there can really help with looking at some of these issues. And one thing I'll mention is, we're going to talk about, obtaining DMS approvals from that office. One thing to consider is, let's say that we have a major event in Houston. You all know that your staff and your offices are impacted, and the same thing can happen to the regulatory agencies that we need to also lean on. So understanding kind of how the other agencies will deal with that in terms of bringing other staff in to supplement their operation, or they may shift, or delegate responsibility to staff in other areas of the state, is just something that we have to kind of keep in mind and know that will likely happen. John, you want to add to this?
Yeah, as Nick mentioned, you all know where the TCEQ, I'm sure you know where the TCEQ regional office is for your region. So whether you're up in Grand Prairie, you're out in Longview, Athens, you're out in the Lubbock area, or you're down in Corpus or here in the Houston area, you all know where your particular, and you know those folks. However, please understand that their offices may be impacted as well, and you may have to go to the Austin or the headquarters for information. I recall back in Hurricane Rita in 2005 that impacted the Southeast Texas area, Chambers, Orange, Beaumont, Port Arthur, all those Jefferson County areas. The regional office was closed. We tried to find those information. They were taking care of their own folks. So we had to go to the headquarters level to try to get some of that information. So please keep in mind that the website, TCEQ website, is generally speaking updated regularly, and you're going to need to coordinate with them, whether it's debris sites or whether it's a specialized program. Just keep them in mind, and especially understand that they're going to be in response to during those few days after the disaster. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. So the last thing I'll mention on this slide is to keep in mind the guidance at TCEQ's level is really good. I would make sure you have like a copy of the regional guidance document here that's on your screen from this link on hand, and know that when a disaster occurs, as we've seen recently, if you go to the TCEQ's website, they have guidance on, I think, managing debris from tornadoes and wildfires from different events in Texas. But you have to keep in mind that that information may not be readily available when we have a major disaster declaration fast, right? It may take some time for somebody to update, get information posted to a website. especially if power is down and, we have a resource issue in terms of staffing. So having this information on hand, this document's pretty good in terms of outlining, where different waste streams are typically allowed to go, and what your options to manage debris are post-disaster. So TCEQ DMS management sites approval. In this case, we have a link to the document. You can find this on their website. And it talks to you about different requirements for completing the application. And I'm going to walk through a couple of things here. One thing I'll mention is we do a lot of permitting for debris management sites in our line of work all across the country. And most states have different requirements. It's really kind of hard to find some that have the same types of requirements and processes. Some states don't even really issue debris management site permits for vegetative debris, as we've seen. But a lot of states do. And I'll give you the example of in Florida, you can actually pre-permit your debris management sites. You cannot do that in Texas. So the best thing that we can do is basically have sites identified, maybe coordinate with the TCEQ at the local level if you have relationships there, and say, hey, I'm considering, this piece of property for debris management on a contingency basis if it's ever needed in the future, and get some feedback there. You can also use GIS tools to map a lot of different, requirements that we're going to talk about on the form, and basically, have information ready, fill out most of the form if you want, and keep it in a file, and just be kind of ready to go if the time comes, right? And so you'll see on here, TCEQ wants the name of the disaster to be listed. Again, pointing to these types of sites are not pre-permitted. It's always disaster specific. And what are you requesting authorization for? So we've got staging stockpile sites, emergency burial site, emergency burn site, and wood chipping, which is honestly going to be the most commonly thing that we see around here. It'd be a combination of staging and stockpiling. And if you're going to grind mulch debris, you check the box for wood chipping. Then we've got the site information, site ownership information, who's requesting this authorization, if it's different from the property owner, and typically that'd be, the municipality or your debris management contractor. And then, site contractor information, who's managing the site, et cetera. And on the second page, they really talk more about what some of the requirements that they're looking for to get that authorization. So one thing we'll mention, this is a frequently asked question: how long is my DMS site authorization good for? And at the top it says approval is for 90 days from the date of the state or federal disaster. I'll also tell you that commonly we see, even if it's a 60-day, some areas it may be a 30 to 60 day approval timeline. And, in this case it's 90. And a lot of times, especially in a major event, you may see that timeline for approval be extended. That's pretty common. So it says notification must be made to the local TCEQ regional office. You can consult with them on guidance. And in bold here, we've got, you must have local government approval. So what does that mean? That means that the state is wanting to make sure whoever's requesting this has, approval from the local government. So whether that's you and your city or at the county level, they want to make sure that this is being done on behalf of a municipality, and that local government has provided concurrence or approval in the event that you are not asking for this DMS site authorization. This is a big one, so let's talk about that. Ensure that the site is located above the 100-year floodplain. This is pretty typical in DMS regulations that we see. It also occurs in FEMA's debris management site guidance. Basically, the premise is they really don't want to store disaster debris in the floodplain. Now I'll give you the or. So it says, or has an authorization from the local floodplain administrator. Parentheses, the floodplain map used for locating the site must be from a flood insurance rate map prepared by FEMA. Basically, they want to see the FEMA firm map data. And this is another thing we can use GIS, tools to do, just map the site, see if it's in a floodplain. So the big thing here is to know if you want to avoid storing debris in the floodplain. Why? Because think about it, oftentimes we're managing disaster debris from floods, and we don't necessarily want to cause an impact, by storing mass quantities of debris in the floodplain. I'll tell you, in areas like us in the Houston-Galveston region, it has been done. I've personally permitted sites in the floodplain, went through a process at this time when I was working with the county, had the county administrator grant approval for the temporary storage of debris, and there was no issues. So it is something you really should keep in mind when you're in an area where a lot of honestly, quite frankly, good available land that's open and doesn't have any issues is limited here, right? We have a lot of development, so land that's left really kind of probably has a problem. Could be in the floodplain or floodway, and we're just limited on space. And we see that a lot in urban environments similar to the Houston-Galveston region, quite frankly. So just keep this in mind. I would also say absolutely, we've seen that storing debris in the floodway is an absolute no. I'll tell you that's going to be an issue, although I'd caveat it that I've seen FEMA actually get involved in another state. It was actually Arkansas from a tornado there, where they did work with the community to allow debris to be stored in a large area of floodway. It happened to be along a major river that probably wasn't going to have a rapid, increase of flood into their park area that happened to be in the floodway. So that's another example of a lot of times when we think things will be a no, they're in a disaster situation. There's always the chance that things can be a yes. Okay. So moving on here, ensure the site is located outside of any known wetlands. That's a big one. You're going to see that come up in things that we talk about that FEMA will be looking for later on. They're going to check and make sure we didn't have a wetland impact here. So you always want to make sure you avoid any kind of wetland impact from storing debris in an area. If you think you got a good site and you go out there and you do a site visit and you say, man, this site, it's always wet, or it's pretty swampy out here. That's probably not going to be the place you want to put all your eggs in that basket of storing debris on this particular site, right? And number one, can be challenging for a contractor in terms of accessing it. And there would be things that there would be modifications probably needed on that property to make it suitable for bringing trucks in and fill activities. And so those are the kinds of things, if you see wetlands there, that you want to avoid. Ensure that the site is located at least a quarter mile from any public or private water supply. Okay, so the question is, how do we find that out? We can map water wells in the area, water supply systems. In Texas, really haven't seen an issue with this in terms of debris management site approvals. A lot of times in the urban environment, we've got people on public systems and wells that are far away. But if you had a groundwater well on that site, it's probably going to be an issue at the TCEQ level. John, you want to add to this a little bit?
Sure. Just from what you've heard from Nick, please understand, involve your GIS team. The leaps and bounds that GIS has come and being able to map things is just tremendous. So when you're looking at DMS sites, you're going to have them at the table. Second thing I want to say is involve your contractor. If you do have a pre-disaster contractor in place, have a discussion with them, because you might not always be looking at public land. You might be looking at private land, and you're still going to have the same conversations. So from a practical perspective, we have to fill out the forms. We've got to coordinate with TCEQ, bring the mapping folks, and bring the right people to the table, because this one, folks, is a huge decision that's going to be with you for several months and it's going to have some potentially long-ranging impact. So thanks, Nick.
Awesome. A couple other things I'll mention without reading everything that's on this page is just, there's a statement here about 24-hour control of the site. So you really want to work with your contractor or your municipal staff to make sure that that site is secure. You want to prevent illegal dumping to that facility as much as practical, right? And then it says refer to, FEMA guidance as a disclaimer here that TCEQ wants to make sure that even if it's not listed on this page, that in a major disaster declaration where FEMA is funding the debris removal activities, that we're following FEMA and federal guidance. And the last thing I'll mention kind of down at the bottom is it does provide guidance on basically burning and emergency burning sites. And so you need to have authorization from the TCEQ to perform those activities. And in a lot of cases, what we would typically see in burning operations, which are frequent, don't see them so much commonly used in really high density urban areas, right? But when we're out in more rural areas or things where population centers are a little more spread out, it is a common debris reduction activity. And so most of the times the contractor's using an air curtain incinerator on that site, it needs an approval from TCEQ. So with that, just keep in mind, a lot of things to look at in the DMS permitting process. So what can we do, once we've got our permit to document baseline data collection? So, photograph the site. Let's look at what's here before the operation started. Document any physical features. Maybe there's structures that are on there that the owner wants to make sure are avoided. Investigate historical significance. We're going to talk more about that a little later on. And most debris contracts that we see, have requirements for a contractor to collect soil and sometimes groundwater samples at the site. That's something that's pretty much a really good practice to do. Not necessarily required in every situation. We've seen some states or DEQs do want to see that information. But this is a good practice in terms of just making sure that the activity on that site didn't cause any kind of issue for that landowner. And that landowner could be you guys as, city and county staff, could be publicly owned property, or, in the case of using something that's privately owned and making sure that, you limit any kind of liability coming back from that entity or from that owner. Next slide. So debris fact. After Hurricane Harvey, the TCEQ here approved probably, close to 100 DMS sites probably across the Gulf Coast region. And a lot of those sites were approved rapidly within 24 hours. I know personally I had some take a little bit longer than that, but generally, even recently, we've seen TCEQ really be able to turn these around pretty quick. So it's not something that immediately post disaster you should be waiting, days or even up to a week on. And Brian, do you want to add a little bit here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, talking about availability of sites, particularly if you've had some sites in mind for a while or have them in your plan, it's so important to go back and review those at least yearly, just to make sure those sites are still available. I've looked at a number of plans. We've gone back to look at their debris management sites, and now there's a grocery store on that site, or now this one's has homes built on it or something. So, or maybe it's now in the floodplain and wasn't before, particularly after Harvey. So anyway, it's just important to keep in mind that to continually review those sites to make sure they're still available, and then have some backup sites. Nick mentioned it earlier about working with the local TCEQ folks, and they are really good to work with and running ideas by. He mentioned they don't pre-approve the sites, but you can run ideas by them if you have a picture of a site and a layout, you want to let them give their thought on how that might work or if it would be a problem. They've been really great with me as far as providing that information. So just wanted to share that, some other planning ideas for debris management sites.
Awesome. And so we kind of mentioned this earlier. You can see guidance from TCEQ based on different types of events. So for wildfires, there's some information available on their website. And Texas Department of State Health Services. So, this is really, we're going to see them get involved in private property debris removal or looking at removal of asbestos from various facilities that we may need to handle. Texas Historical Commission, again, they're going to review our historical issues. We've got an example of a form later in the slide. So similarly to getting our TCEQ DMS permit, there's some paperwork that can go to Texas Historical Commission and have them review that DMS site as well. And we want to make sure that is done on behalf of your community and that there aren't any issues later on. Again, they've got a one-page form and it's really easy to use.
Nick, yeah, I'd argue that it's hard to not argue that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the Texas Historical Commission are the two most important state agencies when it comes to this topic, whether it's archaeological or environmental. Those are going to be the folks that you want to have reflected in your plans. They're the ones that, from just a documentation and forms perspective, you're gonna have that as part of your artifact, if you will, for the debris removal operation. And then as you get into more complex issues and complex debris removal programs, the more involvement they're going to have. I mean, I see this. I was joking. We were prepping for today's presentation, and I was thinking back to the Price is Right. Okay, that one of my favorite shows growing up, Bob Barker and all this other stuff and all these little games. And it's the cliffhanger game is my favorite. That was the little yodeler guy. And I mean, think about it, folks, that the further he went up, the more money he had, and at some point he's going to fall off that cliff. Where I'm going with this is you don't want to fall off the cliff. And the more complex the debris removal operations are, the more involvement and more influence environmental and historical commission and considerations you have. So think about that when you're getting into these new programs that a lot of you in the debris space are being tasked with. So and then you get into some really unique circumstances and whatnot, tornado activity or a building collapse, something like this. That's going to be a part of your solution, and so you got to keep that in mind. So that was all I had there, Nick. Before we moved on to text.
So TxDOT. All right, everybody knows TxDOT. So TxDOT acts as the lead agency for emergency roadway debris clearance, removal, and disposal efforts along state and federal highways. And obviously in our communities, we may have state maintained roads, and coordination amongst entities and debris contractors is helpful to do with TxDOT. Texas Animal Health Commission, this entity really can help us with the disposal or basically handling of dead animals following a disaster. And I know in some recent events in our area, we've seen everything from numerous dead cattle that can be trapped and drowned. I know in Harvey we had to deal with some horses. So really, if dealing with your public health type folks and reaching out to state agencies like Texas Animal Health Commission really can assist with that and making sure that there are ways to handle those dead animals. Texas General Land Office. So another one that's good in the removal of derelict vessels in the community and to coordinate debris removal from publicly owned beaches and state-owned submerged lands, which is the GLO is there to primarily manage state-owned land like that. They also manage recovery grants through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So it's a really important entity that we will deal with, definitely in the recovery process and long-term rehab and repair programs. They also handle navigable waterways, floodplain issues, beach and dune regulation, and public beach easements. So in your community, if you've got beaches and coastal waterways, then the GLO is going to be somebody that we definitely are interacting with. So GLO regulations following Hurricane Ike, they helped establish temporary permitting lines, guide for debris cleanup. They handled enforcement on a case-by-case basis, really got into working with public health and safety risk to restrict public access to certain areas. And they handled FEMA buyout, moving the permitting line back 200 feet from mean low tide or the natural vegetation line. So again, really important agency to make sure we've got contacts with. So let's talk about real quick federal regulatory agencies that we're going to deal with. Number one, and most importantly at the top, is FEMA, right? The disaster events that we are really aiming to discuss here are the large, federally declared disasters. And so FEMA is going to be our lead agency, right? We've also got the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, who's here as the lead environmental agency that we may work with. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NRCS, and the Army Corps of Engineers are other big ones. And these entities are here to provide guidance regarding debris eligibility and the FEMA reimbursement process. FEMA is going to assist with developing project worksheets for debris cleanup operations and other project activities that we may have. They're also going to oversee any private property cleanup should that be authorized. So, most of the activities that we're going to start with are debris removal from the right of way. Then later on, you may have, damages on private properties and structures that need to be handled. And that's a separate private property debris removal process. And they are here to really give us advice on managing the environmental and historical preservation review process, because that's going to be key to them in running through their environmental historical preservation review of your operational activities. John, you want to add some?
Sure, I did. I wanted to draw everybody's attention to the photograph there on the right-hand side of your screen. And that was a photograph taken after Hurricane Ike in 2008. Can't believe it's been 15 years, or will be this year. But I want to draw your attention, and actually that's a picture of Mr. Garrett Foskett, who's attending here. I'm sure he could teach a master's class on debris removal operations. And with this particular situation, indeed, you have I want you to understand that field of debris went on for miles. This was right outside of the Bolivar Peninsula, on the other side of the intercoastal. And so you have two issues at play. You have just wide swaths of debris, not really knowing what's in there. Might have environmental impacts. It might be orphaned containers. You have no idea. And then just the sheer volume and magnitude. So again, I go back to my cliffhanger concept there with The Price is Right. And this is a great example of when you need to be on your game, if you will, and be on your toes, because you could be standing on that pile looking out for miles saying, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? And this is going to be expensive, and we don't want to screw things up. So that haven't seen that photograph in a while, but I think I may have should say credit to John Burry there. I'm not quite James Audubon as far as photography, but that's certainly something that I have it's near and dear to my heart, and hopefully you can appreciate the impacts of something like that. So thanks, Dave.
Pretty good picture, considering you probably took it with a flip phone you were using back in those days, or we actually carried around digital cameras. And
I think that was
the iPhone.
I think that was an actual digital camera or something like that. I'm not quite sure. So, my goodness, thank you guys.
All right, so EPA. So we're gonna deal with EPA on large emergency incidents, oil hazardous materials releases, terrorist incidents which can cause us biological, radiological, or chemical attacks. And FEMA issued mission assignments. So the point here is really events that cause a lot of widespread environmental impacts. We're going to deal with the EPA, the EPA and other agencies on in terms of the debris removal program. Most recently, probably saw a lot of that back in Hurricane Katrina, and then the Gulf Coast oil spills several years ago, where EPA is really providing a lot of that management and oversight. So EPA is another source of guidance in handling disaster debris that we can take information from. We've got some links here, and Brian, I'll kind of let you mention a couple of things about just planning related activities that are helpful.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak to this information that EPA put out. It's really helpful. And in there, they have a lot of case studies of what's happened in past responses and debris operations. They talk about resources that are available. They talk a lot about diverting debris, how you can divert it from the landfills, and provide some information on some resources that are available to help you divert debris from landfills, so it doesn't all just end up there. We also included some information in the workshop we did earlier a couple months ago or a month ago. So there's also some information there if you want to look on the H-GAC website about some resources that we can look at for diverting debris from landfills. But anyway, just want to speak to this. It's a real helpful booklet. I was up, they put one out earlier, and then they updated it back in 2019. So great resources, a link there for you. We tried to put links to all the documents that we're showcasing in this presentation. In some cases where the link is just incredibly big, we're going to put it on the H-GAC. We're going to have H-GAC to put it on their website. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So this is our prime authority on endangered species. Something that we want to keep in mind in, as well as our debris management operations can cause adverse impacts to endangered species across the country. Here in our area, primarily we're going to run into the Texas prairie dawn, which is a plant, a rare plant that occurs in the region, as well as in coastal environments. We've got the Kemp Ridley sea turtle and the piping plover. And so FEMA is going to want to make sure that those debris management sites didn't occur in sensitive habitats or impact endangered species. And so coordinating with them or looking at background data through U.S. Fish and Wildlife is helpful to make sure that we're not working in sensitive environments. Again, here's some examples of those species. In the Bastrop fire, obviously, John could probably talk hours about, the Houston toad and sensitive issues there.
And definitely something I won't, but thank you, Nick, for making that offer. The one thing I'll share with you all is that the endangered species elements, or if you do have areas of concern, or you have a group that's involved with protecting a specific species within your jurisdictions or your area, please understand that certainly is, I don't even say may, it is going to be impacted, or it's going to have an impact on your debris operations. So, and things to watch out for is timing. There might be an area or a time of year that you cannot conduct debris removal operations due to the endangered species. You may have to be a part of a Section 7 consultation, or one that may actually occur between the two federal agencies, and some additional guidance may be issued. In addition to that, there might be costs associated with the endangered species and how that impacts your operation. So contractors may come to you and talk about how that may be impacted, or you as an organization may have to have additional costs or additional resources to monitor for this. So, again, you've heard a lot about what have we heard about? Wetlands. We've heard a lot about, the floodplain. We've heard a lot about mapping, and now we're hearing a lot about endangered species. So again, all of those, again, have that intersection of debris operations. So thanks so much.
Yeah,
Nick.
awesome. And one thing just to keep in mind here is when you're looking at debris management sites, we always, and the agencies will commonly lean towards an easier approval process for, debris sites that have been used before, debris sites that have been previously developed, and that can be, impacted from construction activity, mining activity. They've just been previously developed, if you will, before. And sites that are, parking lots or even ball fields, sites that you can use and then restore back to its existing condition are really helpful to avoid issues like this. And the last thing I'll mention on this slide is not an endangered species type of issue, but avoiding nesting migratory birds. So if you were considering or you're about to use a debris management site that was heavily forested, maybe there's some bald eagle nests in the area, or a large rookery of egrets and herons, which I personally have run into before, that are using those trees. You cannot cut those trees down or avoid those migratory bird nesting nests and cause an impact there without having serious repercussions. So the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, similar to FEMA being a lead agency for us on debris removal activities, in some cases when it is going to be waterway debris removal, NRCS will come in as a funding partner, and they assist with removing debris from those stream channels, road culverts and bridges and waterways, reshaping and protecting eroded banks, and basically improving damaged streams, levees and structures. And so that's another federal agency that really can be involved in our debris operations. And of course, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE. Number one, this is a prime regulatory agency for authority on wetlands, jurisdictional wetland impacts, jurisdictional waterways that are in our communities, and making sure that if work is conducted in those areas, that we have proper permits from the Army Corps of Engineers. One thing to keep in mind is this is another entity that will be providing guidance specific to the disaster, on its website or through email communications on emergency type of permitting. So emergency repairs to our structures that have been built in, waterways that are regulated. But again, we just want to stress, if you're considering using a debris management site or you need to work in a wetland area, do not do that without coordinating with the Army Corps of Engineers. So part two, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Let's talk about that. So why are we talking about environmental rules and regulations when it comes to disaster debris management? I will stress to you here that one of the main reasons we're talking about this is because NEPA's basic policy is to ensure that all branches of government give proper consideration to the environment prior to undertaking any major federal action that significantly affects the environment. And so ask yourself real quick, why? Why here? Why now? Why are we talking about this in my debris removal operation? And you are all correct. The reason is because FEMA, as the lead federal agency, is providing reimbursement funding, paying for these activities, right? And so FEMA then must consider impacts to the environment as part of their, as required by law. Okay, that is our most important piece of information there. So for NEPA review, debris operations are generally excluded. And so what do we mean by that? They have been determined, removing debris from existing, road right-of-ways and infrastructure like that generally has been determined to have, a very little to no impact on the environment. Of course, when we get into the expanding of those operations into natural environments or sites that have, not been impacted, those are the types of issues where we need to make sure that environmental reviews have been conducted. And one of the things you're going to hear is that FEMA is going to conduct this review of your project impacts. And we'll show you some examples of that. So when your footprint is changed or significant environmental concerns are associated with the debris project, that is when the NEPA regulations are really going to come into play. So FEMA, here to assist us, is going to most likely issue some guidance for everybody in that community to see. And we wanted to take some time to talk about what FEMA calls their environmental green sheet. You can actually Google different examples of this. We've got one here that actually was from Puerto Rico from a couple years back, but it basically will be, a quick 2 to 3 page little document that outlines some of the environmental rules and regulations that we are talking about today. And the biggest things are they're going to use this at what they call the project briefing with the applicant, who is going to be you. And one other key issue is that FEMA may not be here to talk to us about these things in the early stages of debris removal. So this is key because you need to understand what types of rules and regulations and what types of environmental issues may be associated with our operation in that early time frame, from, I would say, a week, to 2 weeks, hopefully not to 3 weeks, but as we've seen in some examples where federal disaster declarations can take time to be issued, that there can be significant time between the disaster impact, you starting debris removal operations, and FEMA holding a project review meeting to basically kick off the project activities and to inform you, oh, by the way, you need to make sure that the appropriate environmental rules and regulations are followed.
Just before the green sheet there, again, write this one down, folks. This one is a document that you want to make sure you have on hand as part of your artifacts, part of your debris plan, whatever binder you're going to carry around as the debris manager. Make sure you have that green sheet. Again, TCEQ and those documents, Texas Historical Commission, and the FEMA green sheet specifically for your disaster. Okay, keep those 3 things in mind. The other thing I'll say is just, Nick, I want to hit home one piece of information from the audience or for the audience is that, disasters do take time to get declared. We had a recent disaster in the Central Texas area following the ice storm from earlier this year. And I think it was close to 45, 60 days before the disaster declaration was in place. That meant that there was 60 days where this wasn't in place, but yet it was, okay? Because eventually it's going to be, in place. So that really takes it upon you as the local government to really understand. So again, coordination with the TCEQ, Texas Historical Commission, we're tying it all together, folks. So again, 3 most important documents here, those TCEQ forms, okay? We talked about those at the beginning for the debris sites, Texas Historical Commission for the debris sites as well, and then the FEMA green sheet. So keep those 3, go through those 3 going through your head, making sure you have those. So thanks so much.
And let's emphasize this as well. So the reason why we want to make sure that all these things are followed is because, again, FEMA is going to be providing funding here at the federal government level towards a very, expensive disaster recovery effort. And what we want to do is make sure that none of those funds from FEMA are de-obligated. And one of the easiest things for FEMA to do is to look back at your project activity, look at where your debris was picked up from and where it went. Let's say you used a staging site or debris management site and that wasn't permitted, or it wasn't, it had environmental issues that weren't addressed. We've seen instances where municipalities didn't do the Section 106, cultural historical resources review with the appropriate state agency, and basically deobligated funds. And so you don't want that to happen to you. We don't want that to happen to you. And so those are really some of the easiest check the boxes that you can do at your level, early in the debris operations. Just make sure debris management sites are permitted, or that wherever this debris is going is to a permitted facility, landfill, DMS site permit, etc. You don't want to have your debris going to, Bob's homemade landfill in the backyard that has never been,
Yeah, you don't want that.
Not at all.
Nick, just one last thing before we move, and maybe this is not quite tied to environmental justice, but more on the green sheet. We can talk about some of the Native American considerations, especially as it comes to historical. I know you were involved in a couple of different programs and how that's impacted
Absolutely.
several different programs. I know we've had it on the West Coast with wildfires in California, but Bureau of Indian Affairs, maybe some of the other artifacts of cultural significance.
Exactly. So in this example of, some problems or deobligations we've seen in other states, and what has led us to really emphasize, hey, make sure you get the review done by the Texas Historical Commission here in Texas, is because when we do that, then FEMA is basically satisfied with the Historical Commission or historical aspect review. Now, let's say that the Historical Commission came back to us, from that review of the debris management site and said, hey, this site has previously investigated cultural resources and, cannot be used. Or it may say, hey, this site has, some concerns that need to be coordinated with a particular tribal entity who has not just, any kind of land ownership rights or stuff, but we can look at different tribal entities who have had historical interests in a particular area. And so that's kind of common in other states. We do have tribal entities with interests in Texas. So I would say if this came up from the Historical Commission review, we would get that information to the right FEMA contact and allow FEMA to coordinate with the tribes. And that's a really important thing to stress, because you and I can't coordinate with the tribes. In this case, FEMA, federal entity, can coordinate with another federal agency or federal entity, which in this case would be a federally recognized tribe. And so that really helps with this process. It helps to document, hey, there's some historical, archaeological issues here that need to be vetted between the federal government and a tribal entity, and to make sure that they have the opportunity to provide comment, feedback on that particular site. And of course, if that came up, we probably wouldn't want to use that debris management site. But the thing to emphasize is you don't want that occurring after the fact, after you've already started to, put debris on that piece of property, or worst case scenario, have substantial amounts and impacts to it. So again, just something to keep in mind. Environmental justice, part 3. So Executive Order 12898 talks about environmental justice, basically requires federal agencies to identify and address any disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects on minority and low-income populations as a result of their actions. And so the thing to emphasize here is that to consider locations of debris management sites. I would also say to consider that debris removal activity is occurring, in fairness across all spectrums of financial stakeholders in our communities, right? So we don't want to negatively impact one group over another, especially when it comes to storing debris management sites. And Brian, I'll let you kind of give us some examples of that.
Yeah. So, appreciate that, Nick. And Nick said it well. You don't want to look like you're picking on someone, any particular group of people. And particularly, we mentioned the debris management sites there, is that, of course, no one is real excited about having a debris management site in their neighborhood anyway. But you don't want to give that perception that you're picking on a particular class of people. And so one of the things we always try to do in developing debris management plans or updating them is to make sure that if you divide up your jurisdiction in debris zones, and you have a number of zones, and then having debris management sites to represent each of those zones. So in that way, the debris management sites are fairly well, they represent the different zones. And so you have a good number of sites that will serve those particular areas of your jurisdiction, and also helps to prevent that perception of picking on one particular class of people or area of the jurisdiction.
Awesome. One other thing to mention here is when we're looking at those debris management sites, I mean, a best practice obviously may sound like some common sense here is you're going to want to avoid, using a site that's right next to a neighborhood, any residential area. What we've seen in some events and in some communities is, I've kind of mentioned before, in urban areas, we really are running out of room. So in my opinion, if you can provide alleviate some impacts to that community, that's a good practice. We've had other major events, in the case of Harvey, almost, flood debris was everywhere across our region, right? So it didn't really matter so much, that a debris site may have been at closer to the neighborhood level, which really expedited debris removal in those communities. So again, you can provide some benefit to that community by pulling debris out of their area and getting it out of the neighborhood, and just working with your contractor to minimize issues like dust and noise and hours of operations and that sort of thing. Moving on to part 4, disposal options. All right, so we have broached the topic of TCEQ's regulatory guidance. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that says in terms of where it's preferred and options for debris disposal. And the first thing that we really wanted to highlight here is relating that back to the residential level, right? So we've got an example of the debris separation graphic that everybody sees, and it's helpful to push out to communities immediately after storm impact, right? And so this is useful because this is the process of basically explaining to people how to attempt to separate your debris streams by vegetative debris piles, and then all your construction and demolition debris in a separate pile. Unfortunately, realistically, when it comes time to do this in cramped residential areas, a lot of things just kind of get mixed up and folks run out of room. But we do the best we can, right? So as an example, for vegetative debris, the disposal option is preferred to recycle that. It's pretty common that we don't just take all of our vegetative debris and go throw it in the landfill, right? So most contracts are geared up, and most agencies want to see vegetative debris reduced by grinding or reduced by outdoor burning, such as using an air curtain incinerator if possible. And the last resort is obviously landfilling that, which is an option, but not frequently used, right? And so in terms of recycling, also when we reduce that debris, we commonly see it go to uses such as mulch. So a lot of times goes to permitted mulch facilities to then go back into the community as a mulch product. You can also use it in some of your parks areas. And lastly, you'll notice on the DMS permitting form that beneficial use applications can be approved or must be approved by TCEQ. And so in some cases you can properly land apply reduced vegetative debris as agricultural amendments and that sort of thing, following proper agronomic use rates. So let's talk about clean lumber. Example of this is, lumber, siding, plywood. disposal option in the guidance is preferred to be recycle. Most of the times in these events, we really don't see a lot of capability to recycle that type of material just because it's all jumbled up in construction and demolition debris, and would require, sorting to try to pull that material out. So most of the times, you're seeing this material go to as construction and demolition debris to a DMS site, potentially reduced by compaction, or basically compacting, the crap out of that debris as much as possible to then reduce it, ship it to a permitted landfill when a contractor has a good opportunity to do that. And so the landfill options here are both type 4 and type 1 landfills for that type of material. Let's talk about household garbage. You'll notice in debris guidance that we do not have, your debris contractor typically pick up household garbage off the curb. That's not something that can go to a debris management site. So it always must be separated. And most of the times we're looking at, that to go through collection and disposal by the local solid waste contractor, right? So that can only go to a municipal type 1 landfill. White goods. So you probably know, but if you don't know, white goods are commonly is a term we use for appliances such as refrigerators, stoves, washers, and dryers. You will commonly see these come out to your right of way from impacted residential areas. And a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, this is something that commonly disposes of itself. And what I mean by that is prior to debris contractors getting to this material, because typically it's not prioritized in terms of immediate pickup, right? We're trying to get, big debris, either vegetative or flood debris, seeing debris out of those communities. And so appliances usually will walk off from other recyclers and take them to a recycle facility. When you properly do it through your debris hauling contract, typically we take those to a staging area and remove Freon from refrigerators and freezers, and then make sure that was disposed properly. Then the rest of this can go to permitted recycling facilities or to a type 1 landfill. So as you may recall, after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005, there was a mass quantity of white goods that needed to be staged, cleaned, and recycled, and the quantity was about 900,000 units, where the refrigerant was extracted and largely recycled, as well as steel from those being reclaimed. So typically that's a good best practice, is just try to get those white goods to recycling facilities after they're properly handled. Construction and demolition debris. Kind of mentioned this earlier. This is typically, debris we're going to see from damaged homes and structures, from major wind events, as well as floods. In the case of Harvey, if you can remember seeing the pictures of just all the flood debris that came out of homes in our areas, which was overwhelming. And so the disposal options here, we typically in mass quantities like that, it's going to go to the debris management site and be managed just to expedite debris removal in the community, reduced as much as we can at that site, and then disposed in a type 1 landfill. The reduction, what I was looking to say, is really important to communities to, try to maximize or conserve landfill space. And so we see that, as something that's important to our region. I can tell you from working out in Florida and Hurricane Ian, it was incredibly important here. It was actually one of the first debris management concerns that was brought up in the early stages of the operation. The municipality was concerned about all of this, particularly C&D coming to their landfill, and it needed to go out to very far away landfills eventually to be permanently disposed. So again, the types of materials that we're going to see from this are painted, stained, treated wood, as well as sheetrock, that sort of thing. Need to also pay attention to asbestos containing materials, which we may encounter on private property debris removal and really getting into dilapidated structures that need to be handled. Another example of C&D we're going to see is roof shingles. I don't think in our area we've seen a lot of that since Hurricane Ike. Hopefully we don't see it soon, but I guarantee you we're going to see it again. So one option here is to send those as fuel source for cement kilns. Another way they're commonly disposed is in appropriate landfills along with other C&D material. Drywall as well, going to municipal type 4, type 1 landfills. Another thing that I would mention, in case you're not familiar, is the only burning activity that you're going to see in terms of reduction is going to be on that vegetative debris stream and not C&D material. Brian, you want to add something?
Yeah, so I just want to say, of course, it's the public information is going to be really important to get people to separate their debris at the curb. And there was a graphic that we showed that separation of debris, and that is available on the H-GAC website. So there's a couple of different graphics on there that you can see. There's also a video. There's a 3-minute version and a 1-minute version of a video where a guy walks through the importance of debris separation, and it just makes the whole process and the recovery go quicker for your jurisdictions when people do follow that and separate the debris at the curb. And so we'll also be helping H-GAC by providing some messages that can be useful to you and when you're trying to communicate what the public needs to do, provide them instructions regarding debris separation.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about wetlands again a little bit in more detail. So wetlands are areas, swamps, marshes, bogs, prairie potholes, or similar, having a predominance of hydric soils that are inundated or saturated by surface or groundwater conditions. And so we want to make sure that we are not impacting those areas, particularly with storing debris and working in those areas. And one of the things that we can do as a tool, John mentioned, using GIS earlier, we can map wetland areas. We can pull in national wetland inventory data, which is a useful tool to look at areas that may have been identified previously in surveys as a wetland area. And we can use that again just to give us an idea if a property may contain a wetland or not. I would caveat that really to define that or to exactly determine that, you're going to need to do it by qualified personnel through a site visit, at least just to confirm there is a wetland or there is not a wetland on this particular piece of property. So one case study example that we have is wetland debris removal in Chambers County previously. So they requested authorization for debris removal in wetlands and provided the Army Corps of Engineers with a scope of work. They received email confirmation from the Corps with restrictions basically to not fill the wetland, to not excavate the wetland, and to not put down any matting, and follow-up calls with email confirmation, and to maintain all the proper communication for that closeout. So this is a good example just to make sure, when you need to work in those areas, coordinate with the appropriate regulatory officials, and in a disaster situation, there should be good ways for them to be able to provide technical assistance to you as a community stakeholder. So outdoor burning. So TCEQ has guidance on outdoor burning that you can review. This information, as we talked about earlier, also does show up on the BMS authorization form. And as we mentioned, if you're going to use, if you're going to burn debris, which is acceptable, the air curtain incinerators are authorized by the TCEQ. There's also procedures for, various emergency burn activities in the case of not using an air curtain incinerator. But most commonly, we see contractors use the air curtain incinerator, which is that device that blows air over basically a pit in the ground that you're burning the debris in. And it helps to reduce smoke as much as practical in those events and gets the fire really hot. One thing we know in the industry is that this is a very efficient method in reducing debris, because you're going to start with your piles of vegetative debris and reduce that down to basically ashes. And those ashes then can be disposed at a landfill. They can also be reused as agricultural amendments, as long as CCQ provides an approval for that. And you want to make sure you're coordinating those activities with your local fire marshal on burning. And I'll mention again, it's also a good idea to coordinate debris management site activities with the fire marshal as well. Some fire marshals have, mulch facility type guidelines and want to make sure that debris is maintained in certain piles or windrows, and to avoid having issues such as fires. And so, as we mentioned the word fires, one of the unfortunate things that can happen at debris management sites is a fire. And those fires, in this case, I'm not going to use the example of an intentionally, set or man-made set wildfire, but obviously the equipment could contribute to that. But what we see a lot is that debris piles will heat up. If you recall back to several years ago in the Houston area, we had, I think, a large mulching facility that caught on fire. I know the same thing has happened in the Austin region, so they're really particular up there about how much debris is stored on a site, as well as that material, drying out as the management time goes on. Right, that green material is going to become, dead and really dry. And of course, most of these hurricane events are in the summertime, so things are really hot. So as that ground material really starts to decompose, it becomes very hot. The piles become hot, and they can't spontaneously combust. The same thing can happen with construction and demolition debris that some people are not aware of. So something to keep in mind and have a really good, fire management plan and security plan and resources on site that can respond. John, you want to?
This is one of those unexpected pieces of the disaster that you don't think about. You don't think about a pile catching on fire, but it's certainly one that's good for television, which is never good, and two, could really have some effects. It could spread, and it could also cause some issues with the contractor as well. So I can't, and issues from a financial perspective. And again, I could probably spend the next hour talking about this, but with this situation, again, I can't stress enough how important it is to have the security, the fire, your fire departments, your local EMS is aware, and making sure there's no public, and this could happen any time of day. It could be vandalism, what have you. But this one, folks, is one of those unexpected twists that could be really more than a distraction, but a real problem with your debris operations.
Exactly. So I'll give you a little context here with these photos that I found on the internet. And I'll tell you, the photo on the right of the pile, this is C&D material that started to burn at night. Fire department did respond. The photo on the left is an example of that material being basically managed to be put out because no one wanted the C&D material to keep burning, or to burn itself out. So what you see here is fire department apparatus that's providing support. If you notice in here, you've got the excavator that's working while they're fighting the fire, but the excavator is actually part of the firefighting process because the pile needed to be separated pulled stuff out, water and foam applied, and that was the manner of putting this material out. So it's something to be aware of. It's something to make sure that your contractor managing the site has a good fire protection plan as well as a safety plan, and that as debris staging activity goes on in time, that material is being hauled out, and piles are not getting too large. They're not heating up too much, which you can actually measure with temperature or thermometer devices, really long ones that can go into that pile and record, monitor the temperature in those piles. And I would stress again, just coordinating with your local fire marshals, fire departments, to make sure that there are plans to address this. Part 7, so disposal of animals. We've kind of talked about this in a couple examples, but we know that major disaster events can kill livestock, can kill animals, and most of the largest issue is going to be from large livestock, right? Dead cows, dead horses, or mass quantities of dogs and cats that might have been in a shelter environment or an area where they were not evacuated from. And so, as we mentioned, there's different agencies that can assist. I know TEDM and some of their resources with the Texas Veterinary Health and those organizations can really help provide us guidance, as well as having contract or disposal rates in your debris hauling contract to make sure that we can handle the disposal of those dead animals. And so again, TCEQ has some guidance on this. This one happens to talk about from chicken or poultry and bird operations, and how we can handle those debris disposal. So from the guidance, what's preferred is on-site burial or mounding. Obviously, in the case of livestock on property, that's one way to handle it when there's space allowed. If it was something that came into your right of way, which we have seen before, then probably getting those to an appropriate landfill or incinerator facility is also preferred. So diseased poultry or cattle can be outdoor burned when it's most effective means to control the spread of a communicable disease, which we may not be dealing with in our debris generating disaster event. But again, coordinating with those local authorities and firefighters on the disposal or any type of burning of animals is definitely encouraged. John, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to talk to our friends in the South Plains area, in the Lubbock area. I know, in that, Lubbock to Amarillo, how much of the, nation's cattle is in that area. And certainly y'all have been no stranger to flash flooding. And certainly this is something we saw in 2016 here in the Houston-Galveston area, especially down in Fort Bend County, where they had to deal with the animal carcass removal, coordinating with different landowners and that sort of thing. Fortunately, it was not as big of an operation as what was potentially could have due to the way the disaster struck. But I know in situations like Hurricane, I believe it was Hugo in North Carolina, many years ago, almost 20 plus years ago, that the number of hog confinements that were flooded, and this can become super nasty, super quick, and certainly something you don't want to think about, but it could impact you and your debris operation. One of those really unique elements that nobody wants to film an episode of Fear Factor, if y'all remember that show, that when it comes to these debris generating events. So thanks, Nick.
Thank you. All right, moving on. So again, lastly, the Texas Animal Health Commission is really here to provide us support and guidance on how to handle that, how to handle those dead animals. So part 8, we're going to get into household hazardous waste, commonly referred to as HHW. And let's talk about some of the different types of HHW that we're going to see. Number one, batteries. Batteries, the preferred disposal option is going to be recycling. Those are not allowed in municipal solid waste landfills. And so the main way that we're going to typically try to handle household hazardous waste is through collection, right? That can be done through your disaster debris hauling contracts to make sure that you have line items for household hazardous waste collection and pickup. You can do it curbside. Another way to do it is to have, a public drop-off facility where residents bring you debris, or maybe you already have a household hazardous waste collection facility that, commonly is used. And so just making sure you track debris quantities that might come in that are disaster related, and proper disposal is a good way to handle that. Cleaning supplies is another one. Obviously, again, you can do this through household hazardous waste collection. Another acceptable option is that they go to a type 1 landfill or permitted HHW facility. Same thing for your typical automotive products that might be in these residential areas. One option is, a registered used oil collection to manage that disposal from your facility so that oil is recycled. And pesticides. So, another thing to bring up is, as we talk about the residents and debris separating graphics and residents bringing disaster debris to our public right of ways, one of the things that we don't necessarily want to do is have everybody bring material like HHW out to the curb. So, this is where good tools like your communication staff can help with that type of messaging. Because one of the things we don't want to do, obviously we want to separate that debris from, vegetative and C&D material. But as, residential areas begin a recovery process, we don't want people or even children to really be, in an area where you might have, gasoline on the curb or, paint cans on the curb, things that could be sort of hazardous to residents in that environment. John, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's almost I brought up a great point there, Nick, that providing residents with information, especially after a flood or some other debris generating or some other event, if you will, tornado, really anything where you're looking at people's garages or houses that they don't know what to do with it and they feel overwhelmed. They feel overwhelmed about the debris generating event to begin with, the disaster, and this is just going to compound it. And from an environmental perspective, providing individuals with an outlet, this is all reimbursable. Providing individuals with an outlet that is, eligible for reimbursement and part of your cleanup process can certainly make residents feel like you're being responsive, and it's giving them that outlet for a way to dispose of it that doesn't involve throwing these items in a brush pile. That's what we're trying to do. When it comes to this disaster, we understand, I hearken back to that picture of, bottle of peninsula where everything is mixed. And that's a difficult situation. But when it comes to people really restarting and removing these items, this is something that is inevitable. And it's certainly something you need to plan for, and providing those residents with an outlet, again, from an environmental perspective, certainly makes sense. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, another thing to mention on this topic is, related to debris management sites or if you're using public drop-off areas that are related to that. We will have, in the process of managing debris, we will have various inspections by regulatory agencies throughout that operation. So an example is TCQ will be out there inspecting debris management sites. FEMA typically relies on the Army Corps of Engineers as a technical expert to, inspect and kind of oversee and provide feedback on these operations, and they will show up at debris management sites. And so you want to keep in mind, if material inadvertently, let's say, a gas can accidentally comes in with a debris pile of C&D or something to a debris management site, those agencies expect for that gas can to be separated from that debris pile. And so just, another example of working with your regulatory agencies to make sure that we have an area designated for that inadvertent, debris that came in that needs to be separated. Really another good example of coordination that we see. Go next slide. So another one, e-waste. These are your electronics, computers, TVs. In large flood events, hey, we see a lot of this material come out of the house. One way to handle it is through your HHW collection process. The best option here is to recycle those and, have the electronics go back to recycling efforts and save those precious metals. Brian, you want to provide some context here as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the TCEQ has some really good information on their website. If you just plug in like TCEQ and electronics recycling, they have a lot of information and some resources they can point you to for potential resources for recycling those items, those electronic items, computers, other things. And of course, those household campaigns where you can drop off things are useful too. But you also have these a number of resources identified on that site where you can find potential outlets to get rid of those items that may have come by through the disaster.
Thank you. All right, moving on, compressed gas containers. So in a major event, you may see a lot of these out there that have kind of been displaced from the facility that they were at. I'll mention another thing is, you may see some smaller gas containers from a household, small oxygen tanks and things like that, propane tanks that have been used that may have been displaced or damaged and may come to the right of way. And so those types of items can be, collected, and the best disposal option is to recycle them because that is a metal and people use those all the time. Another one, tires. This is probably in the community, your favorite debris stream to talk about, right? Because this is something that not just in disaster events will come to our public right of ways. And so the preferred collection is to pick it up by, an authorized scrap tire transporter. Can also do it in your HHW collection and then get that to a proper recycling facility, which, we have some in the Houston-Galveston area, and they help to chip that material up and reuse rubber in various products. So lastly, we're going to talk a little bit more about some historical considerations, and then we're almost done with this presentation. So the National Historic Preservation Act, we commonly refer some of these issues as Section 106 reviews because Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires FEMA to consider the effects of an undertaking will have on historic properties. So again, tying that back to that federal involvement here, FEMA has to make sure that they are in compliance with Section 106 of the NHPA. And those historic properties can include buildings or groups of buildings in terms of districts, historical structures, objects, landscapes, historical monuments, archaeological sites that we, number one, know about through previous investigations, and those that we don't know about. And so, coordinating with the Historical Commission can help us to basically rely on them to provide feedback and advice as to those potential issues on a property. And traditional cultural properties included in or that are eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. So in terms of the debris management site authorization, as you know, we've kind of gone through TCQ approval process, and we've mentioned the Texas Historical Commission process. And these are key things in various sites and various states, that we see get involved in DMS permitting. And again, relying on them, let's get to their application form to really give us that feedback. So this is an example of a form that Texas Historical Commission uses. It's really easy to use and implement. So the disaster is here. Once we have the basically the federal declaration or the name of the event, you can list that at the top of the form. Request, your authorization similar to that DMS permit. Basically telling THC what we're going to do on that site, putting in the applicant information, site owner, and then really there's just a discovery clause that says in the event that anything is recovered during work or discovered during work on that site, you'd stop work and contact the THC. And so it's got an email address to Bill Martin to send this in. And I'll tell you basically what he does. It's a very fast process. The agency reviews it and puts a signature and approval information on this form and gets it back to you or whoever sent this in. And commonly there's, a couple of maps that will help. Some states have various requirements for that, but basically, a simple map of the site, giving them some information to basically go and look at different records that they have at the agency and determine if there's any cultural historical issues. So guidelines for working, let's say you have historical properties that your entity owns and maintains and that are damaged. Having qualified personnel basically look through historic property guidance and making sure that your repair activities are in compliance with that. Again, coordinating with the historical commission in those scenarios is very helpful. And I would mention too, this is something that's kind of separate or commonly separate from handling disaster debris, on the right of way immediately. This is something you can kind of get into in terms of making emergency repairs or permanent repairs to eligible facilities that fall under this type of requirement. John, you want to add something?
Sure. I want to kind of piggyback, if you will, on the comment you just made, is that when it comes to debris removal, where anything is of historical significance, take the time to plan for it. That means get the right stakeholders and make sure you do your due diligence. Make sure that there is a process in place that you establish or have established when dealing with this type of event or this type of facility, because it's certainly something that you can leverage as far as some federal dollars, but to bring it, bringing a historical property back. But it's certainly something that you want to be careful. And in this, from a debris perspective, you heard from the beginning, at the beginning of today's session, we talked about Albany, Georgia, and some historical parks that were related to the Civil War, and certainly could be looking at other parks that could be battlegrounds associated with the fight for Texas independence or other types of significant areas that you might have some debris, and again, being careful, making sure that you have maybe the right equipment, it's the right that's the right regulations and right sign-offs to do the work. But in any case, you want to be careful and you want to plan for it and bring those right people to the table. So that's just one thing I wanted to add there before moving on there, Nick.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. And just wrapping up here with some key messages. We definitely don't, our intention is not to scare, alarm, or make you feel overwhelmed. It's really coming from a place of just being aware of environmental and historical issues that can occur in disaster debris removal operations. And so a couple of things we want to highlight here is just understanding to what types of issues that may come up, making sure again that you're debris management sites are properly permitted, properly reviewed, and don't have, blaring environmental concerns like wetlands and major floodplain or floodway issues. Always making sure that that debris is going to permitted facilities. I can't stress that enough. Seems like, something very easy for us to do. We just want to make sure it's going to the right places for the right type of disposal. And always following the guidance and really just understanding that there are a number of resources out here to assist communities, the agencies themselves, your contractor, your consultants. The sky is the limit really in terms of resources of knowledgeable people who can assist. And obviously, if we can ever assist you guys through H-GAC and doing events like this to help people understand those issues, that's what we're here for. And with that, I think we might be ready to take any questions from the audience or the chat group.
Yeah, so I did see one, Dick, from Denise, and it was in regards to that contact, Bill Martin with Texas Historical Commission. Denise had noted that Bill has retired and she was asking who the next or who the new point of contact was at Texas Historical Commission.
Well, I will have to admit, I'm happy for Bill Martin, but didn't know that he had left. So we probably should reach out to the Texas Historical Commission and get a revised form from them, since this one has his name, email address, and phone number on it.
So Denise, we'll follow back up and we'll work with Aaron and the H-GAC team to provide that information to all attendees. Thank you so much for noticing and bringing that to our attention. I
hope his replacement is just as helpful and fast as Mr. Martin was.
I know. The folks over there at THC are just unbelievably quick.
I will tell you, he is somebody who really understood what a debris management site was intended to do and knew that he was going to get you an answer fast. So can't thank him enough.
Yeah, Aaron, or actually this is from someone in the audience. When we're talking about needing the debris management sites needing to be a quarter mile away from water wells, are there any online sources for those locations, or if you would recommend just reaching out to surrounding property owners? Nick,
no, you can
on that.
You can. We frequently map permitted water wells in various states, so I know I think it's available on TCEQ's website.
Fantastic. Any more questions out there from the audience? Please don't hesitate to drop it in the meeting chat or do the Q&A function. We certainly appreciate everybody's attendance at today's webinar.
We got a hand raised from Amanda, I believe.
Amanda,
we did have one question for you, and it was, will the slides be available after the presentation today?
There you go. And yes, they will. We will work with H-GAC to do that. And maybe that's a great segue, Amanda, over to you and talking about the survey and some of the follow-up that will occur.
Thank you so much. If my camera was on. So we do have a survey for y'all today that is available online in the chat. And we will also have our presentation online and available for you in a follow-up email that we will be sending shortly after this webinar. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions either. So I think we can adjourn.
All right, thank you once again, and knock on wood, let's keep those hurricanes away, keep those disasters, keep it a quiet rest of the hurricane season and beyond. So thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.